Hello, everyone. Christina here. I had all these grand plans to bring my Christmas tree into my craft room, be all festive for day one of the holiday card series, like I usually am. But let's be real, Halloween is next week. Holiday card series starts usually the week before Halloween, and I am just swamped with prepping for the holiday card series. So, no festive background for me today. So sorry. You're just going to get me talking too. I'm happy to get the holiday card series started for 2024. Is this my 16th year? I think it might be my 15th or 16th year of the holiday card series. Time flies. We're going to jump in, and I'm doing a watercolor card. Watercolor is my jam. And I wanted to try out something a little bit different. I saw this tutorial on an art supplies website by a watercolor artist. I'll put her name on screen. I saw this tutorial for kind of like a northern lights sky with snow-covered trees, and I thought that looks so fun and a great background for any like forest critters. So let's get into it. Here's day one. So I'm going to be using the December Duo stamp set from Mama Elephant. You might remember this because I've already used it once this year, but I love these two little bears wrapped up in a scarf together. And I thought it would be perfect in this, winter northern hemisphere, probably North Pole scene. I thought it was too cute. So I started out by first stamping the two bears in some antique linen distress ink onto some watercolor paper. I'm using Fabriano Artistico Extra White cold press watercolor paper. It's one of my favorites. And I stamped this image twice so that it would be nice and strong, like the lines would be, so I could see them when it comes to painting. I'm using some drying gum, which is a liquid masking fluid, to protect the bears while I work on that winter scene that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. I wanted to be able to, paint the background and not have to worry about painting over areas of the bears that I would later need to paint as the bears themselves instead of the sky or the ground or the trees. So I thought, you know what? Let's use some masking fluid because that'll protect the bears. Now, something happened with the masking fluid this time around that I was not anticipating. So I did learn something new when it comes to masking fluid. So stay tuned. I will point that out. So I first penciled on just a couple little slopes. I wanted to get the horizon line on my background before I started painting. I'm using my favorite watercolor palette. This is from Magello. This is their Mission Gold watercolor set. And the first thing that tutorial says to do was to wet the sky area. So I'm using a large flat brush to do that, letting the water kind of soak in. And then I mixed up a very pale blue shade and kind of sweeping that in. I decided to do the same motions that she did in the tutorial, so just kind of like a downward slope to the right side. And then bring in slightly darker shades of blue, kind of making sure you leave some areas in the middle. You want it to look a little bit stripy at this point. So I'm going to dry that with my heat tool, and then you're going to keep doing that over and over again, building color on this sky. And you're even going to wet the area at the beginning of each step. So I wet that and then came in with even stronger blue paint, kind of bringing those upward swooshing motions. I did more of an intense blue on the outer edges of my scene here, and then right through the center I used a lighter blue. I think I did 3 layers of color for this, just trying to get that intense color. And in the end, mine didn't look too much like Northern Lights. It looked, pretty pale, just like an interesting sky. But I think if you wanted to really change this up and use greens and pinks, those are really common colors with the Northern Lights, I think it would look like Northern Lights even more. I was just sort of just sticking with the colors that she had shared in the tutorial, and I think it turned out pretty great. So after I did that, I splattered on some white gouache. This was also in her tutorial. And that might have, that's what I learned about the masking fluid. You're going to see here, right here, that the white gouache sort of eats through the masking fluid. and it sticks to the bear. And thankfully, they weren't in too many odd spots, but I did have some kind of white snowflakes on the small bear's face. It works out in the end, but just something odd to note. So I thought, oh, okay, well, next time I do this, I'll just remove the masking fluid first, put a little bit of paper towel over the bears, not just the bottom portion, and then I don't have to worry about that gouache going in areas where I don't want it. So in the tutorial, the next thing she says to do is to take your dark blue shade that you were using for the sky and use that to kind of draw some blobs on for your trees. So, and then when you get to the bottom of the tree, you're going to wet your brush and just pull that color down. So I'm blobbing on my tree, and then I'm coming in with a wet brush and just pulling that color from the bottom of the tree. And that's going to give it, the illusion of the shadow underneath the tree. I also was worried about possibly painting over the top of the gouache and having my wet watercolor trees reactivate the white gouache, but all in all, it didn't do too bad. It didn't reactivate too much, and it did keep those kind of snowflakes in front of the trees. To emphasize the different kind of slopes and hills on my scene, I add a little more of that color. And then I took that darkest blue and added it beneath the bears to give them that same shading that the trees have. So I came back in and added a little bit of darker color over some of the trees since they kind of faded back quite a bit. I also kind of emphasized the bottom of the trees a little bit more. I just wasn't happy with how they looked right then. But on the whole, I really liked this particular way of doing trees. I've always done really like far away trees like this, but these are more up close, and I think it looks really cute. So after those were dry, I came in with some more white gouache. And in the tutorial, she even mentions leave some gaps, but really think about the snow sitting on top of each branch or each bough on the tree. So that's what I was thinking about when I was painting these. And I think this gives it a really whimsical look, makes it look very, very snowy. I like adding the snow on top of the trees. I don't think I've ever done that before in quite this way. So now I'm going to go in and start painting the bears. Something to note, in the past, or my most recent past, I've done all of my no-line watercoloring with distress inks. And I was so used to always using distress inks that going back to traditional watercolor paints surprised me a little bit. I'd forgotten that with traditional watercolor paints, they don't reactivate with the water as much as distress inks do. So I really think for no-line watercoloring, you're better off using distress inks because it really is a little bit more forgiving. You can have that strong color at the edge of your shape and then wet your brush and pull that color in from the edge. I just think it was a little bit more forgiving, especially having just used this same image from Mama Elephant, these two bears, and I painted that image with distress inks in recent past, in like the last month or two. So that was fresh in my mind. And I thought, oh, this isn't quite as easy to build the color and pull the color from the edges as it was the last time. So just something to note, neither good nor bad, just a difference that I noticed. I'm adding some red on the scarf. And I used just a plain red straight from my watercolor palette, watered it down quite a bit. I just wanted a nice base layer of this red. And then I'm going to go back in and add some shading. So I did mix a little bit of a red violet and then brought that in for some spots of shading on the scarf. I just added it right up near where the knot of the scarf is and added some shading in those inner areas. And then I'm going to use that same kind of darker shade and add some stripes onto the scarf. This is going to give it a little bit more of a texture. I also use that same shade for the fringe on the bottom of the scarf, just the little strings hanging down. I made sure to add those stripes in two separate areas for both bands of the scarf. I then brought in a dark brown and painted in the noses on the bears, the eyes, and also their smiles. So the bears are pretty much done at this point. I came in with my white gel pen to re-emphasize some of those snowflakes that stuck to the bear's face from the gouache, and then added some additional ones over the scarf and the bears. I even added some to the background just to have a little more snowflake action happening, but I didn't want to use the white gouache and splatter it because I wanted a little bit more control over where the white snowflakes were going. While I had the white gouache out, I added a little more underneath the trees and just to emphasize those hills. And then I'm pretty much done with all of the painting. This card is almost complete. I wanted to keep it pretty simple, so I'm going to come in and use the big Holiday Words stamp set that I did for Simon Says Stamp. This came out in their Stamptember release. I'm going to use the Seasoned Greetings stamp. I kind of moved my stamp set around to kind of decide what greeting I wanted to use, and this is the one that I decided on. I thought it nestled right in there between the trees and the bears just perfectly. I'm stamping in pigment ink. I'm using some white pigment ink from Simon Says Stamp, and then I'm going to be using some white embossing powder on top. I've started doing all of my white embossing powder by stamping with white pigment ink first, and I've had really good results with that, so I'm just sticking with it. So I hit that with my heat tool until all of that powder was melted. And then I cut down my watercolor panel using the A7 layer size from Waffle Flower. Now, my watercolor piece was quite warped, so I did run it through my die cutting machine once to flatten it out, and then I ran it through again with the die on there to cut it out. So this cuts it out to be the perfect size for an A7 or 5x7 card. Put some nice wide foam tape on the back, and then press that down onto a 5x7 card base. And that is the finished card for day one of the holiday card series. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will be sharing more holiday card videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday up through the week before Christmas. So I hope you'll come back and join me and see all 25 videos of the holiday card series for 2024. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you all on Monday live for day 2.